You're listening to Colorado Chamber Office Hours, a podcast that explores what matters most to business. I'm your host, Ed Sealover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. Let's get talking. Welcome back, everyone. This week on Colorado Chamber Office Hours, we will be discussing a bill that would impact businesses and consumers throughout the state, House Bill 1012. First, it would seek to protect captive consumers. Those are folks in places like airports, entertainment venues, and large outdoor festivals by ensuring they're paying no more for the goods they purchase at these locations than the average price for such goods in the county where they're located. Second, it would require that companies that sell goods for delivery, think Instacart or DoorDash, must list when the price that folks are paying for those goods on their sites are higher than the price they would pay in-store for the same goods. And to explain this bill and the thinking that went into it, we have today one of the primary co-sponsors of the measure, Democratic Representative Yara Zokai of Fort Collins. Representative Zokai, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Good. Well, first, I want to kind of talk about where the idea for this bill came from. I know you were the sponsor of a law last year that aimed to limit price gouging for goods during times of declared emergencies. So I was wondering, is this bill the intellectual successor of sorts to that measure, or has this come from somewhere else?
Yeah, in a way it is. I do view this bill as a continuation of my work to combat price gouging. And ultimately, what that work is rooted in is the fact that we have consolidation of corporate power, and ultimately we have monopolies, which we're not supposed to have in this state or country, but we do. And when we have places where there aren't competition, that is where we see prices go up. And so this is part of that greater work to try to combat that consolidation and make things fair for consumers.
And I'm kind of curious, and you've started into this a little bit, but focusing specifically on these venues, were you hearing a lot of complaints from your constituents about these? Did you look at these and think, okay, here is a place where the goods are just way too high? How did these specific, both the apps and the venues come about?
Yes, I'll say street pricing as a concept is not something I invented. It is an idea that exists in other countries, and other states have explored this as well. And ultimately, the idea that we shouldn't have an excessive price is something that's already in our Consumer Protection Act, and it's in the Consumer Protection Act of most states. But what we see is that in these captive settings, for some reason, we've all been trained to accept that an excessive price is acceptable. And it is something I did hear a lot about. There's families who not too long ago could go to an amusement park or could go to a game, and now that is just too expensive for them. And so we do need to take a look at who our economy is serving and how we can fix it.
For those who haven't read the bill, tell me how this would work exactly.
Essentially, it is on the Attorney General's office to go after excessive pricing. And that currently is the case. They have the authority to go after prices that are egregious. And what we have found, again, is that in these settings, that for some reason, we don't go after excessive prices. And we are making it clear that in a captive space where there isn't competition, those laws still apply. And our Attorney General has the authority to ask why prices are excessive and to hold people who are violating this law accountable.
Let's go first to the captive consumer. I think more people are curious about that one. But you define the excessive prices above the average price of the county in which that is located. So practically, how would this work? And I'll tell you, my thinking went to, okay, let's take the common staple of these foods, the hot dog. There are elk hot dogs, there are tofu hot dogs, there are good hot dogs, there are bad hot dogs out there. How do you figure out what is going to be the benchmark price that's going to determine whether something is excessive?
So within this bill, rulemaking is with the Attorney General's office. And in conversations with their office, they would take a look at a variety of hot dogs, for example, that are sold within that same county and average it out. Now, are they going to look at something that is 5 cents above the average and say that's excessive? Of course not. But when we're looking at $12, $15 for a hot dog, we all know that that's excessive. And so that is the type of situation where the Attorney General could step in.
And I'm curious, obviously what this goes to is trying to keep prices down, but bigger picture, what do you view as coming out of this? Is this going to make those experiences more accessible to people? Is this going to send a message? What do you want the big picture impact of this to be?
Big picture impact is when we're looking at spaces without competition, that is where we have excessive prices. So it is about holding that type of environment accountable and saying just because you don't have a competitor doesn't mean you can gouge people. Now, ultimately, what we're looking at is this concept I'm calling funflation, where we're saying these are things a family doesn't necessarily have to do. And so it seems to be more acceptable to gouge a family in that situation. And that is just not the type of environment that I would like to create for working class families in Colorado. I believe that we should have an economy where working people can have fun, can go out with their family, and where they're not just working and they're not just surviving, but they're able to thrive and enjoy their lives as well. And I don't think that that is a radical idea. I do also want to note, though, that this is touching on spaces where folks also don't have a choice. In the hospital, we experience price gouging. We're paying $12 for a Band-Aid, $80 for Tylenol, when we know if we went down the street, that wouldn't be the case. In our correctional system, we have people who are literally captive, and they are not making, making $2 an hour and are paying $10 for ramen. So we have a number of scenarios where we have seen consumers and individuals be taken advantage of simply because there's not competition.
And one of the things I think is unique about these spaces without competition is that a lot of them right now are charging vendor fees for people to operate there, and that I think goes into this pricing a little bit. How do you deal with that in the bill? I mean, are you basically telling vendors, sorry, you're going to have to take a hit on your profits in order to keep your prices down? Is there going to be any kind of follow up saying you can't charge vendor fees if you're an arena? But how do you deal with that unique aspect of this pricing?
I think that this bill corrects for a lot of those things because in certain situations, I think the vendors being gouged with certain fees that they're paying, for example, to the stadium. And what we are saying is we're not going to interfere into that contract. We're going to say the things that you sell have to be fairly priced. It has to match the street pricing, more or less. And if that means that a stadium is going to ask vendors to operate at a loss, I have a feeling they're not going to have a lot of vendors left. And so this is our way of forcing them to have their contract negotiations. And we know that these stadiums are not hurting. They're making tens of billions of dollars. And we can't just say it's okay to hide the gouging in another space, right? You can't take that price gouging and now hide it within a vendor fee and now it's okay. So we're going to leave that to them to sort out, but this will correct for that, in my opinion.
Okay. Let's shift to the other part of the bill here. Walk me through what this does exactly when it comes to delivery apps, what you're expecting those apps to do and to disclose.
So essentially, what we have right now is a system where people are paying fees and not knowing it. That is the way I view it when I look at individual items being marked up, and people do not know that. They are ordering groceries, they see the service fee, they see the delivery fee, but they don't know that their eggs would have been $2 cheaper had they gone to the store. And who exactly is marking that up, I'm not sure. But the consumer has the right to know that this is an essentially hidden fee that they're paying so they can make the choice of whether it's truly worth it to order delivery.
What do you think the impact, or I don't want to say what do you think, what do you want the impact of this to be? Are you hoping that grocers who work through these apps bring down those prices on the apps or restaurants as well? I mean, what do you want to come out of this?
I think in an ideal world, the individual items would be priced the same in store and online. I don't know exactly where those hidden fees are coming from. I believe that it is for example, DoorDash, Instacart, the service that's adding it on. That is what it seems to be, but maybe it is the store. My goal would be that it wouldn't cost you more to get delivery outside of what's put into your delivery charge and that you can see clearly what that is. And what we're doing here is just giving consumers the choice. So we're not going to dictate what price you have to sell online, but at the very least, someone should know that they're paying a markup.
And what is the enforceability of this one? Is this also going to go through AG rulemaking, or who's going to get hit and how on this one?
I believe it is a deceptive trade practice not to disclose the price difference, and so it can be subject to AG enforcement. And we did not put any private right of action for that piece into this bill.
Okay, but that would still probably land on the delivery app more so than, say, the restaurants whose goods they're selling.
Yeah, this is something that we are asking those apps to disclose.
Okay, okay. And I know going back to the beginning of this conversation, you've talked a lot about affordability. I think anybody would say the food that people are buying is one of those things that's key to affordability. For this, however, is this considered kind of core affordability? Or if people are ordering their meals through here, ordering their groceries to be delivered, is that more of a luxury? Tell me your thinking around that.
I don't view it as a luxury. I know that there's a lot of people who don't have a choice. There's folks who are disabled, who are older, who really can't travel to go get groceries or food. And this has become a very common way of life that is making things easier for those individuals to still get food brought to their house. And they are paying a markup in the delivery and service fee. They should know if they're paying it elsewhere as well.
Okay. Last question for you. If this bill succeeds, do you anticipate coming back in the future with bills that expand at least the ideology behind this to more goods and services? I'm thinking a little bit like the right to repair laws that started out very narrow and then kind of expanded. Or do you view these as just the two areas that you really want to go after with this kind of legislation?
I will continue looking for spaces where there is not competition and where consumers are being taken advantage of. So I don't have a specific plan to expand anything, but I will always be on the lookout for spaces where I think that people are experiencing price gouging and making sure that that's not the case.
Representative Yara Zokai, the primary sponsors of House Bill 1012, thanks for taking a couple minutes to talk to us about it
Thanks so
today.
much.
Well, we've just heard from the sponsor of this significant bill, but just to be clear, this is a proposal that is generating a lot of opposition, including from business groups like the Colorado Chamber of Commerce. And a lot of opposition also is coming from Republicans in advance of the March 3rd initial hearing on HB 1012. And so we now want to dig into why there is so much concern about this bill. And to do that, we have invited into the hot seat Representative Anthony Hartsook of Parker, who serves as the caucus chairman for House Republicans. Representative Hartsook, welcome to Colorado Chamber Office Hours.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for having me here today.
No problem. Well, let's start with a broad question. What concerns you and your fellow party members about this bill?
Great question. I mean, from the macro level, looking at the big picture of the piece, is anything that is going to start committing to setting prices, wages, that limits where businesses can do, what the market's going to drive, starts creating massive problems. And no one is looking at the second, third order effects. And so from a business perspective, that can be problematic.
Absolutely. And you've kind of started down the road I was going to ask you to go down, but the bill obviously does two things. One, it kind of sets requirements for delivery apps about posting prices if they are different on the app than they are in store. And the second part is that it sets these new price limitations for captive consumers. My question was going to be which one of these two bothers you more, but it sounds like it sounds like you've already mentioned that one. Expound on that though. Why is the captive consumer pricing limits so problematic?
Anytime or anytime the government, I should say, sets a price, puts a ceiling on something that doesn't account for what can be downrange, second, third order effects, the businesses have to adapt to that. And the only way to adapt is, what are they going to do? They can either increase their supply, or they could just choose to pull out of the market. If they choose to pull out of the market, then they're going to give up part of their revenue and decide, I'm not going to do business this way, I'm going to go somewhere else. Then the consumer loses, the business loses, and the community loses. When we do that, everyone is on the losing end. So that doesn't make any sense. The other impact is when you look at what the state's going to lose in the way of revenue. If a business pulls out, then the state is losing that revenue, that sales tax, and that additional income, potential employment that's in an area. Those are all things, when you start capping something, that's what happens. When you put that downward pressure and don't allow businesses to adapt or expand and work in that market, that creates an artificial ceiling, and then everyone gets hurt.
Now, when I asked Representative Zokai about this, she said, look, I think one of the effects of this could be that if we cap what can be sold there, the arenas are going to go to their vendors and maybe not charge them as great a fee because they want them to be able to succeed. Is that, from a business perspective, realistic in your mind, or do you think there could be other problems, especially around the contracting with this?
Oh, absolutely not. Yes, you beat me to it. I was going to get into the contracting. mean, the arenas, everything is written with contracts. I mean, as I used to do business development, you lay out a contract. When you are negotiating your contract, you are looking at not only is what do I have to pay, and I have to anticipate what's going to be the increase maybe in prices for resources I'm buying or materials. What is going to be potential problems that I will get into? That stuff is calculated in the contract, and you do that negotiation, and everybody comes to an agreement, and you sign that contract. If now we pass legislation that says, oh, we are superseding this, and all of that effect now has to be adjusted and accounted for in a new legislation, who's going to lose on that? The businesses. And then if the business loses, the next order effect are the consumers. And then when the consumers lose, they've got to go somewhere else. And then who loses is the government on the revenue. No one comes out a winner when you do this. That's the major problems here. You've changed the contract. Businesses are having to adjust. Consumers are having to adjust. Everyone's upset, and then everyone loses. That's not a smart way to pass legislation.
Okay, I think we see some of the legal problems that could arise from this. Economically, though, the sponsors say, look, we want to deal with the issue of affordability. And I think you've probably heard this at times, too. Wow, it is expensive to get, say, food and drinks at a ball game right now. Would this bill not deal with that in some way?
No, I don't think it would. So, let's look at it. Right now, Colorado is the 6th most regulated state in the country. Those regulations come from this building. We have piled regulation after regulation on businesses. I mean, every sector of business has had more regulations, and that increases costs because they have to account for that. And that cost gets passed on to the consumer. And when they write a contract or they expand something, that cost is calculated into it. The more regulations, the more costs that go in there. When they say, oh no, we're going to put a cap on something, if you push down, physics says it has to pop up somewhere else. You simply can't just do that without having an effect happen somewhere else. And when they do that, whether it's violating an existing contract, pushing a business out of an area because they can't afford or they can't meet those requirements, that's going to be those unintended consequences.
And I think you're starting to talk to this, but I want to get a little bit more specific. When you talk about the unintended consequences, obviously the pro side says we think it's going to be lowering prices. Are you suggesting you think that this could actually cut down on the number of vendors at some of these arenas because they just won't be willing to take the price cut that they have to?
Absolutely. It amazes me. You've seen, it's been in the news. You look at some of the states and say, oh, we're going to say this is what you have to sell, this is what you have to do, and we're not going to let you move out. Look at grocery stores. I mean, there's several states that are trying to do this, that are trying to look to raise their capital. These are businesses. These are private entities. They're not government owned. So a private entity does not have to do business in a given region. If it can't make a profit, if it can't pay its employees, if it can't meet its obligations, it's going to move somewhere where it can. We have seen that in the city of Denver. As the regulations have increased, the cost of living has increased, businesses leave. I kind of love it because they tend to come down to my area and my district. And we're very welcoming of businesses because we don't have a lot of those regulations. So they will come down there. That's what businesses will do. They will move to an area where they can operate and make money, because that's what they went into business to do. They want to take care of their staff. They want to employ people. They want to grow. And the more the government puts on regulations and puts their thumb on that scale to limit what that business can do, then they're going to leave. And that will then, one more thing to put in that, that's the business. Then look at the consumer side of it. Then the consumer ends up with less choices. Is that what we really want to achieve? Do we really want to make it to where a business pulls out and now the consumer has fewer choices to pick on whatever it is they want to eat or shop or do in an area?
Some very different thoughts from you and the sponsors here on what the impact this bill could be. I want to focus on one provision on page 6 of this bill, though, that I think is flying under the radar in this whole debate. Now, you're familiar with the debates, 3 years of them, in fact, around bills that legislative Democrats have tried unsuccessfully to pass that would remove from state law what is known as the significant public impact requirement in lawsuits alleging unfair or deceptive trade practices. For those unfamiliar with the provision, it requires plaintiffs plaintiffs claiming deceptive trade practices to prove wider public impact. In other words, that the harm they suffered from a product or service is not an isolated case, but is something that a lot of Coloradans are feeling, in order to receive treble damages or attorney's fees. And those additional awards, those damages and fees against companies, are often necessary for plaintiffs' attorneys to consider taking these cases. I mention all this because a provision in this bill states that any violation of these new price disclosure or price cap mandates is presumed to have a significant public impact. Representative Hartsook, do you see this as a backdoor way to pass a bill that's died in the Senate for the past 3 years? And could this provision actually be quite a big deal?
Yes, I do. I mean, to be very blunt, the Attorney General has plenty of tools at their disposal to prosecute somebody that has deceptive trade practices. And they're going to look at a wide range of impacts. I mean, we were just hearing some legislation the other day in our committee from the Attorney General's office of what has to impact. It has to be broad. It's not just a single narrow focus unless it's a criminal case, and then that's a different aspect. But if you're looking at civil and prices, it has to be a broad impact. If we are going to do something that says, oh, I don't need to take that into account, the significant impact to the public doesn't matter anymore, then who becomes the arbitrator? Who decides? Are we going to say, Attorney General, you pick the business that succeeds and the one that fails? Do you pick the consumer can buy a certain type of soda but not another type? Is that what we want to go down that road? I don't think so, and I'm against that. So bypassing that requirement of a significant impact for the public, I think, is absolutely critical, because that's what our laws are built upon. And to circumvent that system, circumvent that whole law that's in there, that I think is what is deceptive. And I don't think we should be doing that.
Okay. Lastly, this whole session seems to be framed by both parties as an attempt to deal with the affordability crisis. This is one of those bills that Democrats say this is how we want to deal with it. Clearly, Republicans don't agree that this is a way to solve the affordability crisis. What then do you do? What is your answer to how to deal with the affordability crisis, if not a bill like this?
I don't know if you have listened to when our minority leader, Jarvis Caldwell, made his opening statement. We talked about energy. We talked about businesses. We talked about trade unions. We talked about getting everybody at the table. Right now, as I said earlier, we are the 6th most regulated state in the country. Those regulations have a massive impact on the cost of living. We need to do some deregulation. We need to open up some of our energy avenues. We need to open up the circuit so the business community can go out there and start doing what they do best. Now, if a business does something illegal, then prosecute that specific business, but not an industry. We have hammered various industries, oil and gas, agriculture. There's all kinds of things that have gone after businesses, retail. You look at the requirements that have been levied upon them, and they are adjusting. We tend in this bill, and we have passed more regulations, and the rules aren't even in place, and new regulations are being piled on top of that. Businesses are constantly in a reactionary mode. They need to be able to plan steady state, knowing what the downrange costs are going to be so they can grow, expand, or shift markets. We need to stop the regulation. That's the biggest factor that's going in there. The second one then comes in is crime. We need to get a control on crime, because crime, whether it's retail theft loss, whether it's the crime that deters people from shopping or going down to, look at what we have here in the stadium. If there's increased crime in the area, people don't want to go out and shop as much. They don't want to go out and frequent businesses that are in the area. We need to get that crime under control. That will then allow the businesses to expand, put more money out there in the economy, and then people will generate because they'll have more money in their pocketbook.
Representative Anthony Hartsook, thank you for the wide-ranging conversation and for joining us today on Colorado Chamber Office Hours.
Thanks for having me, Ed. Have a great day.
That's it for our interview segment. Now let's take a quick look at what you need to know about the week ahead. As we lay out this week's 5 bills to watch, I want to explain that we had thought when we recorded our first interview of this episode that the much-discussed House Bill 1012 would be one of them. However, we've learned that this hearing has gotten bumped back to Tuesday, March 3rd in the House Judiciary Committee, so go ahead and put that one on your calendar, but it's just a little further out. That said, there's no shortage of bills to watch this week. At 1:30 p.m. Monday, the House Finance Committee is scheduled to take up House Bill 1014, which would extend the state's job growth incentive tax credit another 8 years through 2034. This tax credit, which allows employers to retain half their FICA taxes if they create a certain number of jobs at or above the average wage for the county in which they're located, is arguably Colorado's biggest economic development tool, one that doesn't offer some of the cash giveaways that other states do, but is enough combined with the state's talent pool to get Colorado into the discussion when companies look to expand or relocate. It is backed by the Colorado Chamber of Commerce, and the hearing is scheduled in House Committee Room 112. On Wednesday morning, upon House adjournment, the House Energy and Environment Committee will hear House Bill 1112, which seeks to grant state boards full permitting authority over all types of injection wells, which are the holes in the ground where natural resources companies can put everything from captured carbon to the water used in fracking. State officials have said that getting the authority from EPA, which they'll have to request if the bill passes, is key to simplifying permitting and to ensuring Colorado can determine its own regulations. Natural resources companies and groups like the Colorado Chamber are seeking amendments to ensure that the rules the state would oversee stay consistent with existing federal rules. The hearing is scheduled for the Old State Library. Also on Wednesday will come the first hearing for Senate Bill 20, one of the key child care bills that we discussed in our last episode. This bipartisan proposal, going before the Senate Education Committee at 1:30 p.m., would streamline some regulations for the industry around inspections and around the ability to operate even when they're in land use disputes with local governments. And it would create a task force to study for the rest of this year other ways that the state can make it easier for child care centers to open and to stay in business. The hearing will take place in Senate Committee Room 357. On Thursday at 1:30 p.m., the House Business Affairs and Labor Committee will hear House Bill 1054, which would seek to give state officials the authority to investigate potential worker safety violations and to punish companies that commit them. Sponsors say it's needed because federal agencies like OSHA are backing away from workplace safety regulations. But business groups like the Colorado Chamber oppose this proposal because they say it will create duplicative and confusing rules and drive a significant price tag to essentially create a state version of OSHA. The hearing is scheduled in House Committee Room 112. Finally, in a separate committee meeting at 1:30 p.m. Thursday, the House Energy and Environment Committee will debate House Bill 1121, which would create new reporting requirements for any company that emits pollution. Right now, such companies have to report emissions to the federal and state authorities, and citizens can request that information through government agencies. But HB 1121 would require that companies also post this information on their own websites so that people can find it more easily, in the view of the sponsors. Business groups like the Colorado Chamber oppose the plan, though, saying it creates duplicative and costly regulations. The hearing is set to take place in the Old State Library. That's all for this episode of Colorado Chamber Office Hours. Once again, I'm Ed Seelover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. I'll keep the conversation going at tsscolorado.com, and we'll see you next time as we explore the issues that matter most to business.